Russia's war in Ukraine may be involved in the destruction of Russia and its economy. Russia's gamble on Ukraine has resulted in a significant loss for the nation. The nation's problems are numerous and significant, and even if the war were to end today, Russia would be in one of its weakest positions since the fall of the Soviet Union, perhaps even worse. The country's most pressing issues are currently on the battlefield. Following the launch of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, Russia's position in Ukraine is becoming increasingly difficult. Initially believed to be a temporary setback for Ukrainian forces, the gains made by Ukraine in the northeast of the country have now turned into an outright defeat for Russian forces. Ukraine has been able to cut off critical lines of communication running from Russia to key positions in the occupied territories. The defeat of the 1st Guards Tank Army, Russia's most elite armor formation, in the Battle of Lyman has sealed the fate of Russian forces in the occupied north. This elite unit, equipped with some of the best equipment that Russia had to offer, was originally meant to be the tip of the spear in an attack on NATO's defenses. Now, with a significant portion of its equipment abandoned and its tankers and gunners fleeing for their lives, it serves as an indication of the scale of Russia's defeat. The 1st Guards are unparalleled in their excellence. Despite initial beliefs that the counteroffensive in the south would be successful for Ukraine, it failed to make substantial progress. However, Russia's mistake of repositioning multiple battalion tactical groups to the south left its northern flank vulnerable, and Ukraine was able to achieve a surprise victory with the liberation of Kherson, which had been the only regional capital taken by Russia. This was a significant blow to Russian morale and led to criticism from even the most ardent Russian supporters. However, Ukraine did not achieve these victories alone, as they received significant financial and military aid from the West. In fact, Russia's greatest problem in Ukraine is the vast amount of aid that has been flowing into the country, keeping the government stable and allowing them to continue fighting. Additionally, the advanced Western equipment being used by Ukraine poses a significant threat to Russian forces. In response, Russia has attempted to use nuclear brinkmanship as a means of deterring further military support for Ukraine. Vladimir Putin has repeatedly suggested the use of nuclear weapons as a possibility, without explicitly stating that he would actually use them. This has caused concern among Western observers, who are worried about the potential for nuclear war. Putin's statements were meant to intimidate supporters of Ukraine and discourage military support for the country. Since then, discussions about providing Ukraine with more weapons have been met with warnings about escalation. The United States, for example, has refrained from providing Ukraine with war-winning weapons out of fear of Russia's response. However, it is unlikely that Russia would use nuclear weapons, as this would likely result in devastating consequences for the country, including being ostracized as a terrorist state for decades to come, with potential loss of support from China. Russia has already used up all its conventional options in Ukraine. Draft of more troops is the last resort, which also is not a game changer. The relationship between India and Russia would become untenable if India continues to exploit Russian energy and act against international norms. Furthermore, the flow of weapons to Ukraine would only increase, as Western nations seek to eliminate Russia as a threat to world order. NATO would likely take military action against Russia, and the US has not provided Ukraine with the long-range missiles it requested due to concerns about escalation. Russia has attempted to launch a strategic bombing campaign against Ukraine, but this tactic is unlikely to be successful as strategic bombing alone has not led to military victory in any conflict since the advent of flight. Even in World War II, a survey conducted by the U.S. military revealed that strategic bombing of German industry only had a short-term effect on Germany's ability to support the war. Factories that were damaged during the war were either swiftly rebuilt or repaired. However, the disruption of supply lines and direct ground combat resulted in long-term and severe industrial impairment. Similarly, the bombing of Japan's industry hindered, but did not prevent their ability to continue fighting in the war, and it would not have been enough to end the conflict on its own. During the Vietnam War, the United States effectively exhausted its bombing targets within a few years. Any locations with industrial or economic importance had already been destroyed, in some cases, even multiple times. Despite this, the war ultimately ended with a peace agreement between the U.S. and North Vietnam, the withdrawal of U.S. forces, and a victory for North Vietnam over South Vietnam, whose industry remained largely intact. Russia's current campaign of attacking Ukraine's power grid and civilian infrastructure, with the added random civilian targets as well, is destined to fail due to two major issues. Firstly, the campaign's objectives are the determination and resilience displayed by the man and the people of Ukraine have earned them the distinction of being Time magazine's Man of the Year. President Zelensky's statements reflect the courage and spirit of the Ukrainian nation, and will undoubtedly be remembered as historic quotes alongside other notable phrases such as "I don't need a ride, I need ammunition." History has shown that breaking the will of a population to resist is a formidable task. Even in the face of occupation and hardship, countries have refused to surrender, with civilians willingly bearing incredible sacrifices to achieve victory. As an example, even with the majority of its territory under threat or occupied during World War II, Germany refused to give up, and civilians were forming territorial defense units until the very end. Similarly, despite facing certain defeat, a significant portion of the Japanese population believed they could win the war, even as the U.S. launched devastating bombing campaigns on their home islands and population centers. Through the lens of history, it is clear that Ukraine's fighting spirit is unlikely to be broken by the challenges it currently faces. However, Russia's bombing campaign not only poses a problem for Ukraine's morale, but also has limited effectiveness on the country's ability to support an ongoing war. This is demonstrated by the examples from World War II where the U.S. bombing of Japanese infrastructure did have an impact on their war economy, but at a heavy cost to the civilian population. Despite ongoing efforts, Russia's campaign against Ukraine has encountered a significant obstacle in its inability to effectively cut off Ukraine's supply lines. Despite bombing civilian areas, Russia has been unable to impede the flow of arms and resources coming into Ukraine from NATO countries, which continues to arm and equip Ukrainian forces. Russia's lack of global political influence in comparison to the United States and its allies also limits its ability to impose economic sanctions or strategically block resources. Additionally, the threat of retaliation from NATO and the imposition of severe sanctions have further hindered Russia's efforts and inflicted significant economic damage to the country. Russia's reserves, which were initially able to buffer the effects of sanctions, are now dwindling, and the Russian economy is projected to continue contracting in the coming months.